Okay, hello folks. Just double checking that the stream is up and running. Just give me 1 second. Okay, good. Okay, the stream looks good. Yeah, good morning. Good morning, everyone. We have another lecture today. Today, you're just getting me, no special guests, but I hope it's still going to be exciting. Let me just make sure that all of these are muted. Um, that's always the thing, right? Okay, here we go. Muted, muted. Perfect. Now everything is up and ready. Okay, I'm excited to see you. Thanks so much for saying good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's getting closer towards the end of the DEI intensive. So that's for all the digital experience innovation students. So I'm really excited that we almost made it at this point through this intensive. And as you all know, it was intensive. So it is exciting that you are here today. And thanks, Jay. Appreciate that. Okay, so we're about to get started now. I do want to start sharing my slides. Today's lecture, as you might have clued in from the title, is going to be about an introduction to UX research. And I'm quite excited to be giving that lecture today. Again, thanks everyone for coming here and joining us for the lecture. What I want to do in the next couple of minutes, we got about 40 minutes for the lecture, and then we got, as usual, around 10 minutes for Q&A towards the end. I want to give everyone that has no clue about UX research a sort of a soft introduction to the topic so that hopefully you will find some value in user experience research for your company, for yourself. Hopefully this will give you a good overview of what can be done and the things that are possible to do in the space of UX research. All right, so without further ado, this is my name. I'm Leonard Nacke. You already know me. I'm a professor at the University of Waterloo. This is my website. If you want to read up on academic writing, I write a lot about that. I have a newsletter on it. And yeah, I also do publish on Medium a little bit about user research for games specifically. So if you're interested in that, there's an opportunity to tune into that there. So what are we talking about today? It's basically structured into 6 units. First, I want to talk a little bit about what is UX research, showing you the types of UX research, as well as the key UX research methods. And that's really sort of the body of the talk. I'm really excited for you to be learning what do we actually employ, what do we use in day-to-day user research work. And then I'll talk a little bit about the process. Where does it fit into product design? Now, yesterday, our students went through this process of ideation, designing as part of the building of a product and the conception of a product or an app. And UX research does fit into that process as well. And then we have the impact of UX research, which might be interesting for those of you that are thinking about, hey, maybe we can deploy that somewhere. How can we do that? And that should be really exciting for everyone that's interested in that. And I can see there's also people here. Hi to Kelby. Yes, if you run a user research company, or if you're launching a user research app, that's even better. We'll talk a bit about some of the tools that are out there, but specifically about the methods. The students today, if you go into your Learn installation, you'll see this big mind map that I've created with a lot of different apps that are out there. So that's all available in your Learn installation. And yeah, if people are interested, I can also post that online later. But okay, so that's the research process, then the impact, and then about getting started with UX research. Okay, so without further ado, what is UX research? Yeah, what's the idea behind this? You've heard it. Some of you might have joined this program because you have a vetted interest in user research. But there's, of course, more to it than just a name. So really, the idea behind user research is that it bridges the gap between what we think users need and what users actually need. Yeah, that's really something to keep in mind. The user experience research is the practice of understanding user needs, behaviors, and challenges through methods like observation and analysis. And UX research really focuses on how people are interacting with a product or service, and then it gathers data that informs design decisions. So UX research really tries to understand what the users are struggling with and what drives them to do the things that they do with the apps that we've built. And that then, knowing all of that, helps us make products that are easy to use, that are inclusive and accessible as well, and that fulfill user needs. Now, there's a lot of tools in the tool shed for that: surveys, interviews, observational studies, usability testing, contextual inquiry, card sorting, tree testing, eye tracking, physiological measures, A&B testing, ethnographic research, diary studies. Too many to mention. I will pick out some later when we talk about the UX research methods. I'll pick out some of the most common ones, but it's a giant toolbox that you can use if you wanted to study users. Okay, so that's the idea between user experience research or user research, is to bridge the gap between the designer intent, is what we call that, what we think users need, and what users actually need. And that's the feedback that we get from the users. So quite an exciting space to be in between there. Okay, so what are the goals of UX research? It is, of course, to gather actionable insights that guide the design and the development of user-friendly products, right? So think about that. You want the insights to be actionable and you want the products to be user-friendly. But to do that, you have to identify user problems, you have to understand how people engage with products, and you have to evaluate possible solutions for that. So ultimately, the research that you do makes sure that the product aligns with the user needs, and that leads to a more satisfying user experience and usually higher success rates for the product itself. So understanding the user needs, understanding the pain points comes first. It builds the framework for how we can guide product design so that we create better user experiences. And then we have an intuitive and accessible product. Fantastic. Now, as you might know, there are some people that have caveats to that. If you ever seen any talk from Steve Jobs or disciples tout on social media about how users don't really know what they want, like a good designer should just tell the users what they want. And there is some truth to that. There is some truth to design intuition and bringing a good design to users. And that is, of course, a quite interesting space to be in. But I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that, yes, you can have some intuition, you can put a product in front of users, but the validation bit is really where user research comes in. And, if you have questions about that, keep in mind, I'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentations. I'll be monitoring the chat a bit, but of course, as I'm presenting, I don't really interact with you in the chat that much. So just keep that in mind, okay? Really excited to tell you then about how does it fit into product development. UX research fits into product development because it plays a critical role throughout the entire process. Now, in this schematic overview here, we can see a little bit about that, because UX research is used at the project start as we're doing some research and analysis about the initial ideas. Sometimes we do stakeholder interviews right at the beginning. And early research helps define the product's direction by identifying the user needs and the market gaps. So user research and analysis in those early stages is kind of overlapping a little bit with market research as well, right? So market research, user research kind of goes hand in hand. You're identifying the gaps in the market, and then you're developing prototypes, and you're building things. As you're building things, you're testing that as well. As the product is evolving, you do continuous testing, you do continuous user feedback, which ensures that the design is always user centered. So finally, of course, you go through concept stages. So you test the concept, then you go through detailed design stages, you develop and measure that and test that. And again, there's different methods that you can use. A lot of the methods can be used in a lot of these stages in different ways, and that works out quite well. But then post launch, you go into also measuring user retention, measuring user satisfaction, and really decide on, do I want to allow future updates? Is it possible to get a good understanding of how we can shape this product going forward, going into the future? And that itself, I think, is also something that we find quite useful as we're building things. So hopefully you understand that it is integrated, or it should be integrated. Again, it's not always. You've seen the layoffs recently of user experience researchers, but it should be integrated in every stage of the process. Now, can anyone do it? So if your product manager comes to you and says, hey, just do some user testing. No, of course not everyone can do it, because you have to think about, the stages. You have to think about the data gathering. You need specialized skills as you're evolving your toolbox. Here's some helpful references if you want to get started with user experience research. And to my students, I'll be sharing those slides with you. Of course, you can click on the references and it will help you get some background knowledge there. Okay, the types of UX research that are out there are important to understand as you're trying to set up the environment within which you're doing user research. Now, first, we have the foundational versus the evaluative research, also sometimes called the formative versus the summative research. And this is a really important thing to understand as you're walking into the space of user testing. Formative testing happens during the design process, and it really gives you some insights on how you can improve the product before it launches. This is the type of research that is iterative, that focuses on refining the design. And then the summative or the evaluative testing is usually conducted after a product or after a feature is near completion, where you evaluate, does it meet the goals that we've set? Does it perform as expected? This formative testing is more to refine at the beginning, because you're refining ideas, you're refining sketches and concepts. And then summative testing or evaluative testing is usually used to do some validation of features, validation of design directions. So foundational, usually much more focused on the user needs, on the pain points, on the opportunities, and the direction and the scope of the product. Evaluative, really more focused on meeting user expectations, validating that bit. So I put that in questions here. The what and the why are usually answered by this early stage testing. The how is answered by the evaluative summative testing that's happening later. So it's just important to kind of know the mindset that you're in, kind of helps you understand the stage that you're in as you're going through these different types of testing. Then we're going to attitudinal versus behavioral research. Now, of course, there's this idea that in attitudinal research, you're focusing on the idea of what users are saying, so surveys, interviews, this kind of stuff. And then behavioral research, which a lot of people hold much more valuable, focuses on what users do, the usability test, the analytics, A and B testing. So attitudinal gives you opinions, behavioral gives you actions. Now, my questions to the crowd is, if we go back to this thing, do you see in which stage of, or which type of research, the formative or the summative, these would map, just kind of based on your understanding? Put it in the chat right now if this is something where you have a feeling about it. Where would attitudinal research be more useful, as in giving you opinions about things? And where would behavioral research, as in like it shows you the actions that people do, be more useful? Okay, this is my question to you. Let me know what you think. So again, to explain this to you and put your thought in the chat. Does attitudinal to which does attitudinal map? Does it map to formative or summative? And to which does behavioral map? Does it map to formative or summative? So let me know. But again, to explain to you, in case you're still struggling with what's what. So attitudinal research is what users say about the experience, the needs, and the expectations. And it can be done in surveys and interviews and focus groups, although focus groups are a bit contested. Whereas attitudinal research also gives you self-report data from participants as you're asking about thoughts, feelings, and opinions about a product or service. Whereas the behavioral research really involves directly observing user interactions with a product, where you get the data on user behavior. And behavioral research focuses on the things that the users do, the actions that they do, the interactions that you can get through usability tests, heat maps, or eye tracking even. And attitudinal research tells you what people think. Behavioral research tells you how they actually behave. Okay, do I have, let me check the chat. Do I have any answers yet? Has anyone clued in what could be where? Okay, so we got one attempt here saying attitudinal during the foundational research, behavioral when testing the usability experience of the product. Exactly. Again, it can be, of course, it can be used in both. But if you had to map it, then the mapping would be attitudinal in the early stages. Yeah, okay, we've got more coming in. So yes, attitudinal in the early stages, and then behavioral, getting confirmation of the design, ensuring the correct things go into the development. That is really nice. And yes, you can, well, this one actually I think is upside down. Again, you can do both, but I'd say attitudinal is more in the formative part because you're just getting more of the ideas, and then behavioral is more in the summative part based on my ideas. And Melanie also says attitudinal first and then behavioral for user testing. So that I think I can agree with. I think there's really a lot to be said here. So I think it's important to understand these different stages. Of course, it's no hard and fast rule. And yeah, Jay, if you think you have it backwards, don't worry. You can use both and both. But more useful is, of course, if you use the attitudinal at the beginning as you're trying to get a better understanding of things. And yeah, we got some feedback here. Sarah says behavioral for me at the start. We really want to know what they really want. And again, behavioral, this is important to understand as well. Behavioral is really versatile. So some people also just swear by behavioral and say, I don't really need to do attitudinal stuff, which, you can live that life as well and it works fine. Just keep in mind that it is possible to do both. And that, of course, brings us to the next idea of qualitative versus quantitative research. And there's a big debate about around that. Of course, there are like hardened and fastened camps with some people that haven't done this for a long time. But the idea is really that qualitative focuses on understanding user experiences, motivations, and pain points through the methods that we have that give us this rich qualitative data, like interviews or open-ended surveys with open-ended questions, which really give you the deep insights and is a little bit more subjective. So that's something to keep in mind. The subjectiveness, however, is not necessarily a bad thing here. It helps us understand the deeper motivations for why people are doing things. So you really get a good understanding of the why behind behavior. Whereas in quantitative research, if you're thinking about surveys with Likert scales or things like that, you get larger data sets. And if you're doing behavioral tracking or other things, you really get very measurable data and even larger scale analytics. If you're using something like Hotjar or other website tracking tools, you really understand how many users are performing a task or the time it takes them to complete a task. So it really offers statistically relevant, statistically significant results, but can often lack the depth of qualitative research. So this is why a lot of people really love mixed methods. Anyone got any thoughts about what mixed methods are? Please put it in the chat. I'll reveal it in a second. But the name kind of gives it away. What do you think is a mixed method? Put it in the chat right now. So again, just kind of focusing on the differences here. Qualitative research, more exploratory, focusing on the why and how question. Quantitative research is more about the what and the how much. So strength, qualitative, depth and insight, but usually smaller samples, and then quantitative, statistical validation, trends, but you can't miss you can miss the nuances of user behavior sometimes. All right. Has anyone put in to the chat yet what mixed methods are? I don't see anything yet, but I'm going to reveal it. Mixed methods are, of course, the blend of the methods. So you can have both. You can have a little bit of qualitative and you can have a little bit of quantitative. Yeah, David says it right. Combination of both. Yeah, there we go. And yes, and it can be used in studies as well. A study that uses quant plus qual, often that order, which is actually true, Melanie. Often quant is first, as it kind of sets the stage, and then qual to kind of follow up on some of the quant results, because you get a lot of the what from the quant, but you don't necessarily get the why, and you really want to understand some of the motivations for why people are doing that. So that's excellent. Thank you very much for everyone for chiming in there. Okay, so now that we know that, and that we kind of know that this is how we want to analyze different types of user behavior, what are the key UX research methods that we need to know? Well, of course, the trusted friend of any user researcher is observation, or in an extended way, if you think about extending observation, the contextual inquiry. What does that mean? An observation is usually a real-time observation, as you're watching somebody and taking notes as they're doing an action in their natural environment. And then if you're doing some follow-up questions, it becomes a contextual inquiry, because the inquiry part is where you're asking questions about why the person is doing the thing in the context that they're in. So observation contextual inquiry is really one of the key things that we have here as one of the easiest tools in our toolbox. So it helps you understand the user behavior, but also the environment and the challenges without any interference there, because you're with the participant in that space. And it's really useful for understanding or uncovering some unexpected patterns or issues that users might not articulate themselves, but that you can observe as they're doing that. And they might not even be aware that they're doing that. So the nice thing is you can do that follow-up question to understand that deeper. And direct observation is often used in those early product development stages to get an idea of how users are currently performing the tasks that the app that you're building is giving them. And again, usually done in their own environment, so that you see how the product is deployed in the day-to-day life, how the challenges are revealed in that context. And that may not happen if you're doing more structured user testing in a laboratory or more controlled environment. So you get a richer understanding of the workflows and the external factors that are affecting the usability of your product, which is also why, if you're looking up any definition of user experience, it should always include context. I came up with this player experience model like 10, 15 years ago. And this was one of the first things I learned as I was trying to define what player experience is in a game environment, was to kind of think about, okay, there's really three parts of this. One is the system itself, the computing system. One is the person, the user, which you could say is a human system as well. And then one is the context within which it all happens and appears. And I think that's really important to understand. And then we got a question here. I'm going to bookmark that for later about software engineering. Okay, I'll come back to that after the talk. All right, so overall, this is a really great way to get started. Then interviews, which of course can be part of direct observation, is usually a great follow-up, but it's also a great method by itself. And there's usually two types of interviews that you see are being used in a UX scenario. One is a one-on-one user interview. That's a fundamental tool where you are getting deeper insights into user needs, motivations, and challenges by asking them open-ended questions. If you've done an observation before, they're usually follow-up questions about why certain behaviors were exhibited. The other thing that you can do is stakeholder interviews that are usually conversations with the people that are invested in the product at the beginning. This can be project managers or designers, to make sure that what you're building is aligning between the user needs and the business objectives. This is really important. A lot of students that had my classic UX training at the beginning are later, when they're finding jobs, they're coming back and they're saying, well, but you said advocate for the user and all that stuff, and that's awesome, but I also have these business pressures. And this is really where you find yourself as a UX researcher. You find yourself managing the user needs and understanding that with the business objectives that are out there, where you also have to make the company money. And ideally, you find an ethical balance to both of that, but it can be really tricky. Now, back to the one-on-one interviews, if you want this to do very effectively, you have to go through different stages where you're preparing everything, you're clearly defining the research goals that you have, you're preparing an interview script with open-ended and non-leading questions. In later, when you learn about UX in one of our later courses, we really talk about what that means, what non-leading questions are, because it is actually quite tricky to build good questions that don't lead the user down a certain path. And building rapport. So it's really like a people skill, starting with a small talk to help the participants feel more comfortable with you so that they're more likely to open up in a discussion with you. And then you transition into that interview quite easily. One skill that is really key for a user researcher as they're trying to understand what the basics are of user interviewing is active listening. So focusing intently on the participant, what they're saying, so that you can ask clarifying questions and follow up, and not to interrupt them. So really bad user research habits would be a user researcher that talks more about themselves than about the participants. So usually it is a delicate dance between prompting the participant to say something to listening to the participant to give some more details about the experience that they just had. So, you want to kind of leave some room for dead air in between, because that actually can facilitate the participant telling you more about the things that you want to hear. And then you want to probe for details. So you follow up on interesting responses with how or why questions, so that you get those rich insights, because the how or why questions are the ones that you can only answer in these types of sessions. And of course, as you can see in this generated image here, is you got to get participant consent first, but you want to record the session so that you can later do deeper analysis. We now have got like really excellent AI-based tools that help us transcribing. Back in the day, we had to do a lot of manual transcripts, a lot of manual labor. Now AI is really good. The Whisper API from OpenAI is really good at transcribing things. Otter AI is a really great tool that helps you transcribe voice interviews into text so that you can later do an analysis with that. So there's a lot of things that have emerged in recent years that made our life much easier when it comes to user interviewing and gathering that data. And then after the interview, you can immediately capture key takeaways and reflections. You can even work with the transcript as you're feeding that to an AI that works through the key points and helps you kind of identify the key points. This does not replace the manual labor of going through the transcript to validate that these are valid concerns, but it does speed things up quite a bit. All right. The next thing that we have to know about is usability testing. And there's, of course, different ways that you can usability test. One key way is moderated usability testing. And usability testing in general is a method that assesses how easily users can complete certain tasks as they're using a product. So in the main types that we have, which is moderated and unmoderated, the moderated tests let you involve a researcher that guides the participant through the app and asks follow-up questions about the task. So usability testing usually has a task that you need to achieve with the app that you're using, and then you can ask questions about that app. In unmoderated tests, the tasks are just displayed and it's done independently of a moderator, just by the users themselves, and often done remotely as they're being recorded as they're going through that testing. It's quite a nice way to gather data on autopilot, you can say. And there's, of course, great tools out there that allow you to do that. But in general, even moderated tests can also be remote. So you can do an in-person test where you're in a lab setting and you're doing it in person, and you can do a remote setting. And this has become more common, of course, during COVID, where the user researcher just comes in remotely. There's a screen share, and they walk you through the things that are happening on that screen. Okay. The next thing to think about is surveys. And this is a really fast and efficient way to gather data from a broader audience. Surveys are kind of a one-shot tool that a lot of beginning user researchers are really enjoying. Surveys are fast and efficient, and they get a lot of data quickly. So you can collect quantitative data if you use scales and surveys that have numbers or an agreement, an attitudinal agreement between a statement. And you can get these ideas quickly about what users prefer, what they're satisfied with, and also if they want to rank or rate their behaviors in some way. So get a little bit of an understanding of the behavior, but of course it's not the same as behavior tracking. And surveys are really useful when you need to gather a lot of feedback from many users. Again, the N needs to be high, so you need a large sample that you're working with. But how effective they are, of course, depends on the design of the survey. There's a lot of statistical tools that you can employ to make sure that the survey is valid. Ideally, you're using a survey that has already been published in scientific literature, that has been classified as reliable and valid. And so you make sure that you can actually trust the data that is coming from the surveys. Okay, I'm going to keep your question, Jay, for later. And so best practices in survey design include that you also keep the survey concise and that you mix different question types. No leading questions, of course, so you don't get biased results. But really, I think there's some sort of Goldilocks measure for how long a survey should be. So that's the tricky part. A lot of surveys are too long, and then it leads to user fatigue, and you might end up with people that are not even replying to the survey anymore. Okay, so another technique that is usually done at the very beginning and comes from information architecture is card sorting, which is a method that helps you understand how users categorize and prioritize information in a system. So the users are given some content that you've created and sometimes even just feature labels or navigation links. And then they're asked to organize this content into groups, either groups that make sense to them, which is an open card sort, or groups that you have provided to them and they just need to sort it into the bin, which is a closed card sort. So the technique is super helpful when you're designing navigation menus, when you're structuring large amount of content, like let's say on a website. And it really gives you an idea of how users mentally are grouping items together, what kind of mapping is happening in the user's head as they're trying to identify the structures of your product. So again, it's as I said at the beginning, for UX research, your job is to validate the design intent. So understanding the product structure that you've provided. And with card sorting, you can validate with the user's expectation, as in where they would like to find that content or where they would look for that content. Have you put it there? Is it being provided? And then, you can really improve the usability and findability of the information that you have in your app. And card sorting is a perfect way to do that information architecture bit. Then A and B testing, that's the scientist's bread and butter. A lot of us in the experimental sciences or social sciences, we do A and B testing all the time. We don't call it A and B testing because we're usually comparing different versions of things. Sometimes we do ABC testing because we have 4 different versions of something. But in user experience research, A/B testing is usually 2 versions of a product or feature, which is also why we call it split testing, where you're comparing one version to an almost similar version, except for one feature or one design enhancement, to see which one performs better. And the trick here is to not have too many features that differentiate the versions, so that you can clearly say which feature is advantageous for the other feature. So you don't want to have too much variation in an A and B test. Otherwise, you can't really pinpoint why version A is better than version B, for example. Excuse me. And so the interactions are monitored to determine which version leads to a better outcome, or there are questions along the way that help you understand the experience or the satisfaction more, and which one is more engaging or leads to higher conversion rates or something like that. So it is really effective for making data-driven decisions, and it of course depends on how you design the A and B test, but it provides really clear evidence of which design or feature works best in practice. Really great way of doing testing. Ethnographic research is another thing that you need to be aware of, which is an immersive, long-term observation in natural environments. So really a deep immersive method that involves you spending extended time with the users in their natural habitat or natural environment. It's kind of an anthropological approach, if you want, to understanding your users. So the idea here is that you observe and understand the user cultures, behaviors, and experiences within their real-life context as you're embedding yourself in that context. The idea here is that you get a more holistic understanding of the user's world, just so that you know what is actually going on in their world and what insights might be missed in more structured research settings. So it's really valuable for designing products that fit seamlessly into users' everyday lives. Talking about these kind of long-term studies, another way that you could do that is to use diary studies. So participants in diary studies, they record their experiences with a product over a longer period of time. And this really gives you some insights into the long-term usage and the evolving needs as users are going through an evolution process with your product, and they're understanding the product a little bit better in their daily lives. So it's really good for understanding the frustrations that come with that. It is good for understanding the successes that people have and how this changes as they're going through this period of working with your product over a longer period of time. So you get this nice longitudinal view of user experience, which is often very, very useful. I found this really nice research methods comparison. I'm not going to go over it in all detail. It has a lot of the methods we talked about. It has some additional ones that I didn't talk about here, like eye tracking. Some of these are more complex than we can really cover in an intro lecture. Myself, I do a lot of biometric testing, but that's really not an introductory method. It's a little bit more complicated. But it's really nice to see all of these research methods compared. So feel free to check that out as I make the slides available for you later and look up some of these methods in detail. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the user research process before we go into the end in the Q&A section here. So the UX research process begins with you defining the key research objectives. Now, this is you identifying what you want to learn from the research and how it will impact the design or the product development process. You want to make sure, if you're in a team, that you align all of these ideas with what your team is putting out in terms of a product and what kind of development you're envisioning there. So that's the important bit. And validation of the design concept is the goal at the beginning, or exploring new opportunities, or understanding pain points. All of these are valid starting points for your user research, but defining those objectives up front is really important so that you have the right direction for the UX research project that you're about to embark upon. So always start with defining these objectives. Then, after you know what you're going to study, then you want to do a matching of the research methods to the objectives. So you want to select the most appropriate method to achieve the objective that you're trying to set out. A lot of the times we do this upside down. People come in with their favorite method and they're saying we're going to do that. But it's really nice if you have a research question, which is usually related to a research objective. We usually formulate those as research questions. And then you go into studying that research question with a particular method that is most suited to answering that question. And that's the way to go about that, so that you know that different research goals require different approaches. So if you need in-depth insights into user behavior, then qualitative methods like interviews and ethnographic research might be the best to answer it. If you need to validate some effectiveness of a design, then you want to probably do some more quantitative testing like A&B testing or surveys that help you get the insights for that. The idea really is to match the method to the research question so that you get the most relevant data here. The next thing is how you I love this picture. How you recruit participants. So target participants should, of course, represent your product user base, so that they are the target audience, so that the insights that you're getting are relevant and applicable to that target audience that you're building for. And recruitment for that is usually done through different channels like user databases, social media, third-party recruitment agencies. And you want to define very clear criteria for how you select participants: demographic factors, user experience levels, or skill levels, or specific behaviors that are relevant for your study. All of these are important features to do the selection at the beginning. So good recruitment makes sure that you have accurate and actionable research finding at the end. So it all starts with getting the right participants so that you can say the things that you want to say. Then you have to actually conduct the research session. So here you want to prepare and plan each session very thoroughly, and then you create a comfortable environment for the participants so that they really feel at ease to answer your questions or at ease to being observed. And of course, ethical consent forms have to be given at the beginning so that you make sure everyone consents into you studying that behavior at the beginning. One key aspect there is to let users know if that at any point they feel uncomfortable, they're allowed to drop out of the session, as one of the key tenets of doing ethical research here. So really important to understand how that works together. And you have to understand that whether you're running interviews, usability tests, or surveys, you always want to make sure that your participants are comfortable and that you're asking clear and unbiased questions, and that you're attentive. This comes back to the active listening bit, that you're attentive to their responses, right? You want to get genuine, useful insights without leading or influencing the participant behavior at all. That is really the key to running a good user session. Then you want to analyze and synthesize the data that you've collected. Now, this, of course, is usually some sort of pattern identification where you identify patterns, themes, or insights that you're getting from the raw data. Data usually needs to be processed in some way. And, quantitative data like surveys, qualitative data like interviews, you turn this data into actionable insights. That's really the idea here. That can then guide design decisions. So the data is good, but the data is no good without you actually turning it into a recommendation and an insight that the stakeholder, the design team, can take action upon. So, if it's quantitative, you want to get some statistical tools that help you with that. If it's qualitative, you want to do some sort of thematic coding based on the responses that give you more insights into that data. And then it's not done until you actually present these insights and the recommendations. So ideally, you want to do that with the stakeholders or the people. People hate the term stakeholders. I also think it's like a little bit of a silly term, but it's like the decision makers, if you want, the people that are actually making a decision based on the recommendations that you're providing here, because your job is kind of like an internal consultant, right? You're presenting insights and recommendations, and that, of course, involves not only sharing the findings, but also these clear, actionable suggestions on how to improve the product based on the research. So, and that's really a skill that you need to learn, right? Like a lot of us, we go through user research training, we're really good at finding things, but we're not so good at telling people how this actually influences their product. So this is really where a UX researcher can stand out, where they can make a great suggestion based on the data, and they're tying that back to the data in the right way. So effective presentation is really the key here, but you want to really make sure that your findings are understood and that they're acted upon, that you give people ways to take action. And for that, of course, you can use visual aids, charts, infographics, user quotes. They can all help you in making the data more compelling and more accessible to the people. Okay, so all of that to understand how do user research insights actually drive product decisions. User experience research gives you critical insights that directly influence the product decisions because the user needs, the behaviors, the pain points are now understood so that the teams can now make an informed choice, and this is the design or development teams can make an informed choice about the features, design, and functionality of the system that they're building. So, it might reveal, for example, that the users struggle with a particular feature, and then your design team needs to redesign or simplify that feature for the experience to be better. This is really key stuff because it actually leads to higher ROI, as I will talk about in the next slide. So the product should not only be usable, which is kind of the baseline, but it should also be aligned with your target audience's expectations so that you get user satisfaction and you get better product success. UX research really bridges that gap for you between the assumptions and the actual user needs. So that's why it is effective for product development. But then let's not forget the ROI. Norman Nielsen Group actually had a really nice article about the 3 myths when it comes to ROI. And I think one of the things is like, let's not tie ROI to a number. There's this, as you can see, like faded in the background here, there's this big thing based on some user research report like a while ago, a couple of years ago, that said, for every dollar you spend, you get like $100 in return or something like that. And it's like, it's nice if you try to quantify it like that, but usually it's not as clear cut to quantify the tangible impact on the business's bottom line. If you have well executed UX research, it creates products that are more intuitive, that are easier to use, and that are more satisfying for your customers. And that, of course, can lead to better user retention, to increase sales, and to reduce support costs. And this is actually a big thing. Like if the thing just works out of the box, you have less people asking and needing help to work with the thing because the thing already works. So the return on investment is, often a little bit less tangible here. Like you might see people are adopting a product faster than another one. There are fewer reports of usability issues. There are higher satisfaction rankings or reviews coming in. All of these things are happening in different parts, and they are, of course, combined through the design team or through the product owner or whatever. At the end of the day, these are all stemming from good UX research. They're all stemming from a better UX in the product. So that's the kind of thing to keep in mind as you're getting started there. So, question is, of course, how do we get started with UX research? So, as we get started, we are not in big teams, so we don't really have a lot going on there. We don't need a large budget, or we don't need extensive resources. So if you're watching this stream, or if you're a student in this program that really wants to do user research but has very limited means, you can gather valuable insights by focusing on the low-cost, high-impact methods that we have. So things like user interviews, surveys, or guerrilla testing, where you can quickly and informally test ideas with real users. That's really all there is to it. And observation is one of the easiest and free things that you can do. And there's a lot of free tools or inexpensive tools that you can use for delivering surveys, for doing some remote testing. Like there's the same tools that you use for video chat, you can also use for remote testing. And there's data analysis tools that are completely free, might have a little bit of a higher learning curve, but they're completely free and really help you get some of that insight. So you want to leverage your existing networks at the beginning because you don't really have access to a panel or a very specific user research sample, but you still want to make sure that that works with the kind of thing that you're testing. So friends, family, even contacts on social media, where you can get those initial participants, but still also actionable insights that help you conduct the perfect user research. Start small and then just iterate to grow bigger. And so the other thing is that you want to regularly talk to users. Even if you're like, let's say you're a small company, you have a small product, you don't really have a big budget for user research, regular engagement with your users is actually crucial to staying connected with the needs and expectations. And you might call that community management, but really a little bit of it is also user research, because you're understanding how your product is being used and where the improvements can be made so that you can overall make it a habit to do these short, frequent user interviews or surveys or even usability tests as you're building a product or as you're putting something in front of people, so that you're making sure this product evolves in line with the user needs, like what they actually want, and to prevent any costly mistakes down the line. So this is a really user-centered culture that you can foster within your design team or development team, and that really makes the product resonate with a larger audience. And then, of course, as the organization grows, as your job grows, you want to advocate for UX research in your organization. So you want to communicate the value of UX research in terms of product outcomes, in terms of things that resonate with stakeholders. So the value of the product, but for the stakeholder through the business lens that actually makes sense. So usually you can easily highlight better product outcomes. So customer satisfaction, lower development costs, or return on investment. You can track those somehow, and you can make a case for tying those back to UX, usually quite easily, so that you can really make a case for how UX research is actually positively impacting your products. And again, you start small with existing projects and demonstrating small benefits through measurable outcomes that you can track somehow. And then you build stronger data-driven arguments over time that will get you more buy-in from the decision makers and establish UX research as a core part of your organization's research strategy or product strategy. All right, that brings us to the key takeaways here. Key takeaways are, you need to understand the basics. I talked a lot about the basics. This is a basic lecture, introductory lecture for anyone getting started. UX research informs better design and product decisions. You want to select the right methods that align with your research objectives. You want to make the UX research continuous so that you engage the people regularly and keep your products user-centered. And then you want to focus on low cost, high impact methods that make wise use of your resources. Iterative learning is the key here. And then you want to also advocate for UX research, where you communicate the value of the UX research to stakeholders in terms of the business outcomes, and you use data and case studies to build a strong case for integrating UX research into your organization's strategy. Okay, that is it, friends. We're getting to the question period. So I do already have two questions here that I'm going to start with, but of course, as usual, feel free to just pop your questions in the chat. They will eventually pop up here in my system, and I will be able to answer them for you. And hopefully, you will have lots of questions about this, and we'll have a good discussion. So, thanks again for sending those in right now. First question that came in a little bit earlier was from Fluency on X. Are the methodologies of validation and verification in software engineering always in the top of UX research and design to impact through the whole SDLC? Yeah, I don't really, I kind of have to look at what SDLC is, software development, something lifecycle, software development lifecycle, I'm assuming. So validation and verification, I think is very important. It's very important for the methods. And is that always on top of the UX research? Yes, you want to validate specifically with the summative measures. Now, we talked about formative measures at the very beginning. You might have missed that part. Formative measures help you more in the ideation bit, the validation of design concepts bit, where you get a little bit of a better understanding of some of these initial ideas that you're putting forward. So I think that's a really interesting way to get started. And then you're going more into detail later, and you're doing that validation of design features and that verification, which you're doing with the summative, with the evaluative testing towards the end of the product lifecycle. Jay was asking, is there data around reporting accuracy versus survey length that can be used to inform the ideal length of a survey? Now, there's definitely data about survey length. I can see if I don't know if it's like research studies. I'm going to have to double check. But there's definitely a lot of guides about survey length. And as somebody that's done this for 15 years, I can definitely tell you that there is a lot to be thought about the actual participant fatigue that sets in. So looking for studies on participant fatigue will give you an idea of the best possible survey length and some of the issues that come from that. So yeah, in terms of accuracy, I mean, reporting accuracy, there are standards that you want to use. There are standards. Any statistics textbook will talk about some of the standards that are important there. But it's really kind of important to know that it can't be too long, and that reporting should always be as accurate as possible. There's another question here. Could you share some examples of UX studies that have been done in the past that you personally really liked, and the product outcomes that were achieved because of the research? I'd have to connect some of them. They're not on top of my mind, but there are lots of studies out there that improve product outcomes. I haven't prepared a list, so I'd kind of have to look this up. But if you want, later today, I can share some of those with you in the Learn platform. I can give you some examples here. If you're taking the DEI 626 course, you will actually have an entire module that goes through some of the studies that helped improve some of the interfaces that we have. The famous one that I usually talk about is Lego. Lego did a lot of early testing when they were kind of pivoting. I think it was in the 90s. I think I wrote about this before. They were pivoting from a very broad product focus and lots of different directions that they were going into with their bricks. And they were trying to understand really, like, how are kids actually using our bricks to build stuff. And they had this user research team called the Anthros, made up of anthropologists, that actually went into kids' houses and observed them and asked them questions about their use of things. And there was a kid that talked about its skateboard shoes or their skateboard shoes, and the skateboarding shoes kind of were really preferred, even though they were kind of rugged and problematic. And so the question really was, why is this particular item so cherished, and why is it so good? And one of the things that came out of this was that actually the kids really like these marks of use and this kind of way to showcase that they've been active and engaged with certain things. So out of that research came essentially that they wanted to make the bricks more like less about the fancy IPs and titles, but more about giving the users of Lego bricks the ability to showcase their projects, which of course led to initiatives that you might know, where you can create your own build plans. There's a huge community that shares different Lego designs that they come up with themselves. There's like Lego challenges, like this duck challenge, where you get a certain set of bricks and you got to come up with X amount of different ways to create a duck with it or something like that. So a lot of insights came from studying these kits and the things that they're using in their environment that influence the product decisions at Lego at that point. So that's something that's on top of my mind. You mentioned that the term stakeholder in stakeholder meeting isn't well liked. Yes, Patrick. In your experience, what is a preferred term? No, I don't think there's really a preferred term. I think decision makers might be one of the terms that works quite well for some people. Again, it's not everyone's jam, as usually is with that case. So you can't always say that this is really something that works for all the people. But I do think there are definitely preferred alternatives there when it comes to stakeholders. So that's just based on my personal observation there. There was also something that didn't pop in here, but that I'm seeing here on LinkedIn. Melanie was asking, you mentioned that the reputation of focus groups is contested. Can you talk about that a bit more? Let's put that. Yeah, I think everyone heard that. So yeah, focus groups is a problem. Why is that essentially? So why are focus groups problematic? Because in focus groups, the issue is that participants are influencing one another. And so one of the things that you can experience when you're running a focus group is that you have a highly active member of the focus group that then kind of pushes other people in a direction that you might not want. So it is people that are more extroverted can usually take over some of the things that are happening in a focus groups, whereas people that are introverted might not be listened to as much in the focus group. So there is a potential for bias. And I think, yeah, Kelby has also posted about this. There's a possibility to be influenced by the loudest voice in the room. And then this is essentially the biggest risk that you have in focus group, is that loudest voice in the room effect, where essentially you're not getting as much out of your participants as you would if you did that separately. So that was this question finally popped up here. So I'm just putting that in here. But yeah, so focus group is definitely a contested idea that we have. Okay. So there was another question here. Do we need to do UX research for small scale products? Or if enough research is available for the similar kind of product, we don't need it. Now, Björn, you're talking to a UX research advocate here. So I will never say that you don't need user research. You always need user research. Is this a trick question? No. So I will always make a point that anything needs user research, and anything, it's really important to conduct this research. It is just different scales within which you conduct this research. So yeah, can you do smaller scale UX research? Absolutely you can. And will it be beneficial? I think it will be still beneficial if you conduct it on a smaller scale research. Erica Hall wrote this book, Just Enough Research, which I can recommend for anyone that's just getting into this, which is just this idea that, yeah, you can overshoot, of course, when it comes to research, but there should be a minimum of research done that makes your products better and that helps you understand these things just in a better, broader way. Okay, so these are all the questions that popped up here. I might have missed some because sometimes it takes a while. It has a little bit of a lag. Um, but we're kind of at the end of our hour today. I thank everyone very much for tuning in to this little lecture, little introduction about UX research now for the DEI students. That's the Digital Experience Innovation students in our program. If you have more questions, feel free to pop into our chat after, and I will answer any more questions that you have. And everyone else, I appreciate you spending some time with me this morning, and hopefully you got some good insights into the UX research process, and I'm excited about that. There's one more question coming in here. Most tech founders, number one advice is not to skip doing user research before developing their product, which I think is true to some extent. But keep in mind, there's also the tech founders and the rising much faster AI area where we've seen a lot of layoffs in the UX space, where I don't think that's always as well understood as it should be. So let me just end with making that point. You always need UX research if you want a better product, and there are different ways to scale that. And also, don't make the mistake of attributing one person for all UX needs. There's different approaches in UX design as there is for UX research, and you really want to make sure you get a specialized user research person to address those user research needs. So thank you very much for tuning in again. Yes, thanks everyone, and I will see you later, and have a good rest of your day.